If you die and return, what is the real value of this experience? And how can it help you let go of unhealthy attachment? If it happened to you, would you have less aversion to death? Hi, it's Margaret Maloney, and welcome to Season 3 of the Death Dhamma podcast. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so appreciative that you are part of my community. And yet, I seek not to be attached to the idea of the podcast or even to the idea of our community. And that's our topic this season: attachment, clinging, and aversion. What happens when we really want something? What happens when we really don't want something? And what does it do to our suffering and dissatisfaction? Let's dive in and find out a little bit more with today's episode. Approximately 4% of adults in Western countries have experienced at least one near-death experience. Although we want to be cautious with that number because a near-death experience is self-reported, meaning I say I had it and then I tell others about it, right? And Buddhists in Western countries are in the minority. But that means, of course, it's possible that a Buddhist can or has experienced a near-death experience, maybe even you. We have meditation practices that are intended to help us prepare for death, to help us gain insight into the process of dying and death. Padmasambhava's Tibetan Book of the Dead is popular, as is the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying by Sogyal Rinpoche or Rinpoche. The goal is to help us face death as calmly and peacefully as possible, our own, and also to help others. Now, our actual moment of death is a critical piece of our spiritual path, part of our progress. Our rebirth is shaped by our karma and our state of mind at the time of our death. If we can be with our own death in a virtuous state of mind, we can strengthen our karma and possibly influence a good rebirth. If we approach death through meditation and acquaint ourselves with the process of death and develop an understanding of what to expect, we can make our death an opportunity for spiritual attainment. In many instances, we might be able to practice meditation as we are dying. So going back to Padmasambhava's work, which comes from the 8th century, and today's Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, which was published in the 1990s, both introduce us to specific phases that the consciousness is purported to progress through during and following death. Some research indicates that there are meditators who are able to create near-death experiences through meditation. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that today. If you are curious, I do encourage you to look up Meditation-Induced Near-Death Experiences, a 3-year longitudinal study. It's open, widely available on SpringerLink. Now, the study investigated the phenomenon of a meditation-induced near-death experience. They call them MI-NDE. And they're comparing this to the type of meditation that is part of our practice as documented in Padmasambhava's work and in the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. So given that some advanced Buddhist meditators can induce near-death experiences at a pre-planned point in time, this meditation-induced experience might make the whole concept of near-death experiences more accessible, helping to advance the understanding into the psychology of death-related processes. So do Buddhists experience near-death experiences? Yes. And some may happen in the way we more commonly think of them. Someone has an accident or an illness and almost dies and then comes back. Or some advanced meditators can reach this state purposefully. In Tibetan Buddhism, there are daloks, individuals that experience, sometimes for hours or even days, near-death experiences and subsequently share Their experience was a means of assisting other spiritual practitioners. So for more about this, consider the book Delok, which is actually spelled Delok, for those of us who are not Tibetan practitioners. Delok, Journey to the Realms Beyond Death. The purpose of the Delok's journey is to help others. They go into a death-like state, and during that time, assist. Then, when they are done, they return to this world. The work of a Delok is admirable, and studying meditators may shed some light on the experience of dying. Buddhism can be very science-friendly. The purpose of meditating on death and dying is to help overcome attachment to the body and to notions, of that eternal and unchanging self, to let go of our attachment to the idea of a eternal and unchanging self. Turning to the Pali Canon, the Mahasatipatthana Sutta from the Digha Nikaya, it's number 22, teaches the 4 frames of reference: body, feeling, mind, and mental qualities. The goal of the meditation taught in this sutta is to bring us to an awareness that helps us to overcome suffering. Now, where the part on dying comes in is in relation to the body, simply stating with the experience of breathing, and then starting or continuing on with movements and its postures and the elementary properties and the inevitable decay of the body. So here is this passage that is very specific. Furthermore, as if he were to see a corpse cast away in a charnel ground, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, is dead, bloated, livid, and festering, he applies it to this very body. This body too, such is the nature, such is its future, such is its unavoidable fate. Or again, as if he were to see a corpse cast away in a charnel ground, picked at by crows, vultures, and hawks, by dogs, hyenas, and various other creatures, a skeleton smeared with flesh and blood, connected with tendons, a fleshless skeleton smeared with blood, connected with tendons, a skeleton without flesh or blood, connected with tendons, bones detached from their tendons, scattered in all directions. Here, a hard bone, there, a softer bone, maybe a hand bone, a foot bone, a shin bone. Over there, a thigh bone. Here, a hip bone. And look, there's the back, and there's a rib, and there's a breastbone, and a shoulder bone, and a neck bone, and a jaw bone, a tooth, perhaps a skull. The bones whitened, somewhat like the color of shells, piled up, more than a year old, decomposed into a powder. He applies it to this very body. This body too, such is its nature, such is its future, such is its unavoidable fate. In this way, he remains focused internally on the body in and of itself, or externally on the body in and of itself, or both internally and externally on the body in and of itself. Or he remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regard to the body, on the phenomenon of passing away with regard to the body, or on the phenomenon of origination and passing away with regard to the body. Or his mindfulness that there is a body is maintained to the extent of knowledge and remembrance, and he remains independent, unsustained by not clinging to anything in the world. That is how a monk remains focused on the body in and of itself. Now note that before this passage, the meditator thinks about the body in different ways. So it doesn't just jump into the charnel ground and the decay and all the bones, but starting by noticing the breath, noticing movement, noticing everything that's within the body and what the body is made up of. And the sutta ends with this. This is the direct path for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and distress, for the attainment of the right method, and for the realization of unbinding. In other words, the 4 frames of reference. Now, this sutta is not entirely about recognizing death. It is about release from suffering using the 4 frames of reference. And my short discussion here is not enough. I truly encourage you to access the sutta itself and to study it with a skillful teacher. You might also take a look at the Kayagata Sati Sutta. Remember, the point is to help the meditation practitioner move beyond being attached to their body and gain insight into the processes of decomposition and dissolution of the body as they occur during and following death. The point is not to create a near-death experience. The point is to meditate in a way that supports your release from suffering, and attachment to the body is one form of suffering. Aversion toward death is one form of suffering. If you do experience a near-death experience, use it to help others understand the process of death. Use it to live with less suffering and to help others do the same. I would love to hear from you, your thoughts, your suggestions, your own stories about attachment. So follow this link, I'm going to read it to you in a minute here, to leave me a 90-second message with your ideas and suggestions. You can go to https://www.speakpipe.com/death_Dhamma_podcast. I suppose you could also just use your favorite search engine to say SpeakPipe Death Dhamma Podcast. And there you can record an audio message for me. And be sure to come over to margaretmaloney.com. That's MargaretMeloni.com and join the community. You've been listening to the Death Dhamma Podcast with your host, Margaret Maloney. Thank you so much for being here. Come find me on margaretmaloney.com, MargaretMeloni.com. And until we meet again, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be at ease, and may you be free from suffering. Bye for now.